Not every attack is tied to politics or religion. Some are driven by rage and the belief that nothing matters.
Yeah, it's violence for its own sake. And recently, the FBI recognized a new category of terrorism labeled Nihilistic Violent Extremism. Here to help us understand this is Matthew Kriner. He's the executive director of the Institute for Countering Digital Extremism. Matthew, thank you for being with us this morning for this conversation.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think a lot of recent news stories that we've covered, we talk about nihilistic violent extremism, but haven't really set out to define what it is, and a lot of people don't know what it is. So what is it?
At its simplest terms, nihilistic violent extremism is a practical definition that allows authorities, specifically law enforcement and the FBI, to attribute acts of violence that are terroristic in nature but lack a singular ideological focus. It's individuals who are mobilized maybe 3 or 4 ideologies, but none of them hold a primacy over that person's beliefs or why they took the violent actions they did. But nonetheless, they're seeking to exploit the weaknesses in society through violent means and hoping to see it collapse or at least degrade a little further.
So this is what I find interesting. I grew up in Minneapolis where the Somali population was actively targeted by terrorism organizations overseas, and children actually left the United States to go over and participate in these terrorist organizations. How is this different if there's no clear ideology? You know, when it comes to the terrorism piece, it seems like there is a clear ideology piece, but now you're saying they're being targeted somewhat the same way with no clear ideology. Help me sort this out.
Yeah, absolutely. So the internet these days is a wash with a lot of different influences on young people, especially. And what we're finding more and more is that ideology is being replaced with memes. It's the shortcut of communication online. You don't need to have a universal framework of what something is in order to act violently. And there are individuals online who are preying on this. They're utilizing these younger person's sense of despair, hopelessness, or just looking ahead at the future and thinking there's not a whole lot of political solutions available. And they're nudging them on this pathway towards just doing something violent in order to gain a sense of community within these online extremist spaces they're building. And so what we often find is that these memes become the form of belief and connection to others, and replace any sense of, say, ISIS ideology or Al-Qaeda or neo-fascist white supremacy.
Yeah, I think that's what's so interesting. I think we have violent acts, you know, that are tied to religious or hate speech, and this just seems to be tied to, it doesn't seem anything specific. So what are some recent events we've seen that would fall in this category?
So the last few school shooters, specifically the individual that perpetrated the attack in Evergreen High School in Colorado, have defined connections to what we're calling NVE networks online, the nihilistic violent extremist groups. Some of these groups are engaged in what's called sadistic online extortion, where they're trying to convince young individuals to engage in acts of self-harm or suicide. A lot of times it's sexualized. The organization NECMEC, this National Center on Exploited and Missing Children, is working very heavily on triaging a lot of the reports that are coming in around these actors. But what we're seeing is that these perpetrators are increasingly being tied into glorification of previous mass shooters, particularly school shooters, and they're all converging together in the same spaces online. And what we're getting as an outcome is these disaffected youth that are going to schools and perpetrating attacks in order to gain credibility, clout, and ultimately a digital legacy that never goes away.
Is there a profile here? Is there a certain age group being targeted, and is it men being targeted, or is gender part of this?
Gender is absolutely a part, backgrounds are a part of this, but ultimately what we're finding is that there's no set profile. We've known this for a long time about terrorist actors. There's no profile that is defined as the terrorist type. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that youth are the dominant demographic here being targeted. Anywhere from the ages of 8 all the way up to 25 is a very wide range.
8 to 25?
8 to 25. We've seen individuals as young as 12 and 13 carrying out some of the worst perpetrated attacks and grooming of others into these types of acts of violence into society.
Okay, so what do I do as a parent of a boy?
Yeah.
The best thing we can say right now at ICDE and the colleagues that we talk with on a regular basis is know what your child is up to online. Have those difficult conversations. At least just start to ask questions. What are you experiencing? What are you feeling scared about online? Open the door, because if you don't know what they're doing, you don't know how to help them, and you don't know then where to steer your family towards the resources that are being developed actively for these types of threats. There's dozens of organizations standing up help around self-harm, depression, or any other form of concerning activity online that ties back to these spaces.
Okay. This is also interesting. We could ask you a million more questions about this, but Matthew Kriner, we appreciate you bringing your insight to the show this morning. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much.